patient representative, Geissler, to give us a patient's view. In all fairness, a patient who is not calling himself an expert in nanotechnology. And this is, I think, especially important because it shows where we are in general with the discussion with patients, and to see how we can, from where we can start, what would be helpful, what would be things that are really important in that situation from a patient perspective. And Jan Geissler is a patient himself, has been very active in establishing a very important patient organization in Germany, which is very much focusing on informing patients about the disease, about the treatment, new treatments, etc. And in the meantime, he has made his way on the European level and is now the project manager, project coordinator, no, not coordinator, project director for UPATI, this IMI project. And in this project, we work together on a nearly weekly basis. So, Jan, if you would like to tell us your point.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, and thank you for inviting me. When you said in your introduction that this is a kind of alien session, I was thinking I'm a kind of alien here as well, being one of the only patient representatives probably at the conference, and that's why I want to thank you, Ingrid, for bringing me here to contribute to the session. So what I want to talk about is briefly what is the role, why patient involvement, and what is the role of patient advocates not only in medicines R&D, but also in nanotechnology. What's my viewpoint on that? Then what's the perspective on risk-benefit and what we as patients need to know. So that's more or less what I want to cover. And I mean, we need to remember that everything we do at this conference and in research and so on is at the end aiming to improve the life of patients and improve the, let's say, the way we deliver healthcare. No matter whether it's drugs, whether it's surgery, whether it's nanotechnology or whatever, if it doesn't benefit patients in the end, it is pretty useless. And that being said, probably healthcare is one of the last industries where, let's say, an industry or some people in industry think that it can deliver products without asking the end user. But this is changing dramatically, especially in development of new treatments, because we acknowledge more and more that health has such huge challenges in cancers, in rare diseases, in many other chronic conditions, which are not solving in the pace and speed that we're developing new therapies at the moment. If we look at the productivity curve just of the pharmaceutical industry over the last 50 years, it has been constantly decreasing because the billion-dollar investment per drug released to patients is decreasing since then. So, being myself a cancer patient, so I've been diagnosed with cancer on Saturday exactly 14 years ago, we are not only concerned about safety, what people think, because people, when they think about patient perspective, first and foremost think about the risks that it has. We're interested in innovation. We need innovation because we need to tackle most cancers, most rare diseases and so on, and have no solution for that so far. So to make patients' lives better, we have a role, and we are not inventing patient involvement. Patient involvement is there already. It's been executed by the HIV community for about 20 years. In oncology, we've been deeply involved in, I would say, the last 10, 15 years, and it's coming up in other diseases as well, where we're not only, let's say, the ones that are reviewing the informed consent and see whether patients can understand it, but we are involved in clinical trial design, in research priority setting, in study monitoring committees, in ethics panels, in post-marketing surveillance projects and whatever. And I've myself been involved in many of them over the last 14 years, myself, in, to improve the life of leukemia patients as well. So what are the roles that we have? We need to differentiate between because the patient doesn't exist. We always need to think about what we are talking about. We can either talk about the naive patient, I would call it, with a genuine personal experience on a certain therapy or disease, who can probably talk about his own case. And that's not what we're talking about when we talk about the patient input. What we're talking about is patient advocacy input, so people that have knowledge over a larger group of patients, know what the key challenges are and which challenges need to be solved. And we talk about research advocates. And this is, let's say, a group of patients, there are a couple of hundred in Europe, which understand the clinical development process, which understand how research works, and which can really sit down with researchers, talk about trial protocols, about research, about risk-benefit, about pharmacovigilance and whatever. And over the years, over the 14 years I've been involved in advocacy, because my background is not medicine, I've worked my way in a very hard way through from being a naive patient to someone who can really judge research and can tell what is probably going not to work on clinical trial protocols. So we are professionals in our own way because we have unique knowledge. Then what does patient involvement look like? Research doesn't happen without patients going there. And I think that's what we see quite costly in many trials, that we wonder in phase 3 trials or at late stage that patients don't join trials. And then we discover, had we discussed earlier on about the research design and about comparative arms and whatever, we probably would have avoided hundreds of millions being wasted on a certain research bid because patients in the end are not interested to join that. So what we are doing is actually we are working with clinicians, we are working potentially with engineers if we talk about about nanomedicine, with regulators, with HTA agencies, with ethics committees and so on, to try to help them understand what our main issues are. And because I was referring to the fact that let's say medical industry or the health industry still thinks it does not need to ask the user. We have made a lot of research about the different perceptions, for example, between doctors and patients. So for example, Myeloma Patients Euronet has published a large study in 2009 where they asked doctors and patients and nurses and relatives about their perception of the severity of specific symptoms and side effects of myeloma treatment, and to what extent it affects their quality of life, and to what extent it affects their decision making. And while on some categories doctors and patients were absolutely on the same page, on things like neuropathy, on hair loss, on fatigue, and things like that, there were magnitudes apart. And that's what I'm always saying when people are thinking, well, we have our advisory boards and we have the doctors in there and they see so many patients. The doctors are going to tell a different thing on many things, because they have a different perception between things that are clinically relevant and things that are making life a hell for a patient. And that's why it's important to have all perspectives in that, and not at the end of the development chain, but really when you're setting priorities and when you're developing things. And there's a lot of more data. There's data from leukemia, from breast cancer, from myeloma, from whatever, which proves the differences in perception between the medical experts and what patients really want and need to know. So as a final stage, as the last point I wanted to make is, of course, you cannot involve the naive patient so easy in research design, because if you involve them and ask them about trial protocols, it doesn't help if they don't understand what you're talking about. And like I said, I've made my journey through being a naive patient to a research advocate on a very hard way, but we discovered years ago that we need to have professional training on our side to give people complementing their individual and their disease experience, complementing that with procedural and regulatory experience and technical experience, so they can join these kind of research groups and tell what they want in the context of how research is being done. And this is why, I mean, Ingrid was one of the driving forces getting me into when we applied for this IMI project, the European Patients Academy, which is an academy, pan-European project funded by the Innovative Medicines Initiative to train patients about the whole drug development process, from early priority setting and preclinical research over clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, benefit risk assessment, HTA, and all the different aspects around that. And we've trained the first 50 patients. We have now selected the next 50 on our expert training course, and these are patient advocates which spend about 250 to 300 hours of their time volunteer in an e-learning training program over a period of 14 months to get educated on the whole scientific process of new medicines development. And I think this is a good sign, because we've received more than 180 applications for the course, that the patient community is really willing to step up their efforts, to professionalize themselves, to understand how you are working and how we can contribute best, on one hand with our unique experience as a patient, and on the other hand understanding your processes. So I think this probably reflects what we can do. And when Ingrid told me about coming to this conference and talk about nanomedicine, I thought I can't tell anything about nanomedicine because in my disease area I have no idea about it. But in the end, it is not very different to what we've been talking about in medicines development 10 years ago. It's a new technology, it's a different technology, involves probably different stakeholders, it might require different processes, benefit risk might be different procedures, but as soon as it's getting in the patient, patients need to be involved in the design, and I think the community is ready for that, and we'd like to contribute to this. So I'm excited about the start of the dialogue on nanomedicine and patient involvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's always very important to know where we go to, and so I think having here the frame that we need to achieve is very important. Now, a key role in this dialogue with the patient is the physician, is the clinician, and we realized in our UPATI discussions that in fact we have so far not managed enough to get this stakeholder into this debate, because clinicians have a different viewpoint, have a different role to play. They have to keep a certain distance to the fate of the patient to be able to do an objective judgment on the situation and the best treatment forward. But nevertheless, the doctor is the most important source of information for the patient, and therefore we need to make sure that the dialogue on this topic is really working well. So I'm very excited to hear what you're going to tell us about that. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce you to everybody here in the